Hello again, YouTube. This is Chuck again, and I'm still here at the museum. I've got another thing I was going to talk about, another exhibit, and let me get around where I can talk to you. If you notice the pictures or the documents there on the wall behind me, they talk about an incident that happened here in 1927 that you may or may not have heard of. And in 1927, the Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer Studios, the MGM Studios, they decided to do a nationwide publicity tour. And if you remember MGM, you remember the MGM Lion, Leo the Lion. Well, what they did is they built an airplane, a special custom airplane, and they packed their lion in it, and they were going to take it cross country. So I'm going to get out of the way, and I'm going to hold this right on this wall. And so if you want to read what it says there, you can go ahead and pause this and you can zoom in on it and you can read this stuff. But I'm going to tell you the story a little bit about it. So anyway, they took off out of Southern California and they had this airplane, and they were going to fly coast to coast. So they flew across the desert into Phoenix. And then remember, this was 1927. They didn't have radios, they didn't have GPS, they didn't have the tracking systems they have now. And so the flying was all done by visual landmarks. And this airplane, it was a Brougham, and it was custom made, and it was very, very similar to the plane that Lindbergh flew across the Atlantic. But they built a cage in it, and they put the lion in there. And the lion, there were several MGM Lions over the years, and this particular one's name actually was Jackie. Well, they put Jackie in the airplane, and along with food and water and all this kind of stuff. And the way you used to have to fly when you wanted to go from Phoenix to Albuquerque is using visual clues. They would take off from Phoenix and they would fly past the Superstition Mountains, which is now just outside of Apache Junction, very, very prominent landmark. They'd fly over the mountain to Roosevelt Lake, which is south of us a ways. Then they would turn at Roosevelt Lake and they would fly north and up till they got over the Mogollon Rim. And once they got over the Mogollon Rim, they would continue north until they got up to around the present-day Holbrook, where they would pick up the railroad, and then they would follow the railroad tracks all the way to Albuquerque. And that was the way that they navigated in those days, because they didn't have what they have now. Well, what ended up happening is when the pilot, a guy named Martin Jensen, after he got out of Roosevelt Lake and he started heading up north toward the Mogollon Rim, he started climbing. Well, it turned out the plane was too heavy and it didn't have enough power. So he flew up the Tonto Creek arm, and Tonto Creek goes all the way to the base of the rim. He flew up the Tonto Creek arm into an area that is now wilderness area called Hell's Gate Wilderness. And he couldn't get the plane to gain enough altitude to climb out of the canyon. And the canyon finally got so narrow that he didn't have any way to turn around in it. And so what he did is he turned into a little side canyon and basically stalled the airplane. He did a controlled stall crash and set the airplane down in this little side canyon. And he was banged up a little bit. The cage was intact, the lion wasn't hurt, and but he was the last place he had seen any buildings was now the community of Gaisila, which is 3 days walk south of where he was at. It took him 3 days to go down through that canyon and get to a ranch. And so when he got down there and he told the rancher people what had happened, they took him in a car, brought him up here to town, and they organized a rescue party, and they went out and they rescued Leo the Lion. And if you want to, you can go on Google and you can Google 1927 MGM plane crash, and there's several accounts of it. But or you can just zoom into the stuff they have on the wall. But another thing that we have is kind of fun is a couple of years ago we had a gentleman recreate the airplane for us and made us a model. Now it's a little hard to get because of the lighting in here, but that's the model that he made. I'm going to do a walk around of that model. It's very, very detailed. Trying to keep it out of the floodlights here because we have it floodlit. We mounted it up high on the wall because we don't want kids messing with it. But if you look in there pretty carefully, you can actually see the lion. And but that's a scale model of the airplane. The wreckage actually, remember this happened in 1927. Later on, the area out there became a wilderness area, federal wilderness area. It's in the town of National Forest land. There's about the best shot we can get from the light. Anyway, let me pull you back down here and talk to you some more. So anyway, back in the early 70s, I was with the fire department, and we did a rope rescue, or a rescue out into the area that is now the Hell's Gate Wilderness. And of course, remember, we didn't have cell phones and all that fancy stuff that we have now. And anyway, we ended up, by the time we got in there and got to the patient, gal with a broken ankle, we went to move her out of where she was at, up on top of a ridgetop where a helicopter could come in and get her. But we quite frankly ran out of daylight, and so we ended up having to stay all night with her on the side of the mountain. And then as soon as it got light enough in the morning, we went ahead and moved her to the top of the ridge where it was open area where a helicopter could land. And an Arizona Department of Public Safety helicopter came and picked her up and took her off to the hospital. Well, then they came back and they ferried us, a few people at a time, in our gear and everything, and took us back out. Well, I was on the last two of us that were there was me and the gentleman who was the Gila County Undersheriff at the time, and there was just the two of us and some equipment. And so when the helicopter come back on the third run, they picked us up. We loaded the equipment on there. They didn't have any other missions pending or anything like that. And the pilot, who was an old Vietnam helicopter pilot, he kind of took us on about an hour-long tour of what is now the Hell's Gate Wilderness area, and he showed us plane crashes. And one of the plane crashes that he showed us was this one. And so there was no way to land, but we hovered about 30 feet above it and looked down at it. It was a fabric plane, so the fabric had all gone away, but the framework and everything was still there. The engine was still there. And that laid there. It was a pretty remote area. Not very many people went into it. But that laid there until the mid-90s. And a group out of Prescott decided they wanted to try to pull it out of there and restore it. It was a low-speed crash, so it didn't tear the plane up really bad, and it was restorable. And so anyway, they started working with the Forest Service, a big super secret thing, because they didn't want anybody to know about it. And they finally got all the permits, and they went in there with a helicopter, and they long-lined all the wreckage from the airplane out, and they took it over to Prescott. And they set it up in a building in Prescott, and they were going to restore it. And what ended up happening, as I understand it, I may be wrong, but I believe the gentleman that was the driving force behind doing all this, he developed some kind of a medical problem and passed away. And so all that the wreckage of that airplane is now in storage over in Prescott somewhere, and they're kind of waiting for somebody to step up and take the lead role on raising money to get that restored and to restore it back to its original condition. So that's just another one of the exhibits here at the museum. I mentioned earlier in one of my other videos, I talked about talking about this incident to a French TV crew, and they actually did a piece on a French TV show. They were supposed to send me the link and tell me where I could go see it at. They never have, so I don't know whether that means it never got done, or if it means they forgot to tell me, or what the deal might be. But at some point in time, I'm actually on French TV talking about this plane crash that happened here back in 1927. So just another little tidbit about stuff we have here at the museum. And I'll let you go for now. This has run a little bit long. But as I always say, take care of each other. It's a wonderful day. It's a wonderful life. And we'll be talking to you some more about some other stuff in the museum here from time to time. But for right now, I'll let you go. So love each other, take care of each other. It's a wonderful life. And until the next one, peace out.